Welcome back. Everybody seeing everything okay? Sounding good? Looking good? Okay. All right. Anybody feel like you're just going to hire out this measurement thing maybe at this point, at least the first time or two? Yeah. Yeah, it gets a little complicated, right? I mean, it's not terrible if you're a typical cracker box rectangle from the 50s, length times width. But when you start having open foyers, here's some other stuff to consider. Again, the overhead view of a house. Let's pretend that's a rectangle. Here's our front door. Here's our stairs. So it's clearly a 2-story. Here's a utility closet. In fact, that utility closet you cannot get to from inside the house. You have to walk around the house, and there's an exterior door. That's the closet where you get to the water heater. Maybe you can store a few things in there. It's not heated and cooled. So if you measure the way we measure a house, don't forget this part, guys. If you were to zoom into this house, I drew just a single line there, but the thickness of the walls is pretty significant too, right? There's that wall thickness where all the studs and insulation and pipes, plumbing, electrical runs, all of that is included in the HLA number. So when you're online looking at houses, and you see heated living area is 1,650 square feet, some of that you cannot access, right? You can't just walk across it. You can't actually even see it. It's enclosed space. But we get to count all of that in North Carolina. We literally pull a tape measure around the perimeter dimensions, and we see, okay, this is, I don't know, what would that be? This is 60 feet across here from that corner to this corner, and then it's 35 feet from this corner to this corner. 60 times 35 is 2,100 square feet. Now, how do we handle from the inside stuff? Well, the stairs don't matter, and none of this is garage space. The garage, let's just say, is a detached garage off to the side, just to keep it simple. So it's a 2-story house. So 2,100 on the lower level and 2,100 on the upper level is 4,200 square feet. But let's not forget about this little thing. When we measure for that utility building, we find that it is 8 feet by 10 feet. Exterior measurements. So there's 80 square feet that we're going to need to subtract. So this is really 4,120, if that's all we're dealing with. You with me? We needed to subtract out that unheated space. Now, also in real life, sometimes you might have something like this, a bay window in a kitchen. And it's like a floor to ceiling little bay window, little jut out. You count that space too. If it's floor space, sometimes it's a bench and they have some different rules, but you actually have to do a little bit of trigonometry. Angles. Oh no. Oops. But it's not as hard as it looks when you're measuring this stuff. You measured the outside dimensions, but we don't have this because this is jutting out the outside of the footprint of the house, of the main part. So we've got this, and that means here's 2 triangles. If you were to take this triangle and bring it over to this side, now all you have is basically a rectangle, right? And so if you can just get this dimension times this dimension, you have everything you need. You don't have to get too complicated. You can just measure from this corner of the bay to where the bay meets the house, and that's going to be the same thing as if you could have physically taken this little bit of it and moved it over to here. just a different shape rectangle kind of is how you could look at it. So let's say this is 7 feet and this is 2 feet. There's another 14 feet that you're going to add back in. So now we're at 4134 heated living area. That sort of thing. And then, okay, if we're going to make it complicated, now let's say we go upstairs and there's this. Here's the upstairs. I didn't tell you this. The entire upstairs has a slanted ceiling. So it's not the same footprint as the downstairs. What it actually is looks like this. So you would actually have to find that 5-foot mark and not measure the entire width of the upstairs, but only this amount of it, where the 5-foot ceiling height touches the floor. So if the whole house on the downstairs is 35, maybe the entire upstairs has a slanted ceiling and only 25 of it goes from the 5-foot high mark to the other 5-foot high mark. So upstairs, you would have to go 60 length times 25 width. Usually you wouldn't see an entire second story like that. It would only be one room like that. Another thing to know is when you're measuring upstairs, you can't exactly float in the air outside to pull tape out of the, pull tape around the exterior. So you have to measure from the inside. And if you're measuring from inside of a room, you're going to pull tape to that interior wall. You've got to allow for the wall thickness, a 1/2 foot, 6 inches as an estimate. So if you're only able to measure to the inside wall, you need to add another 1/2 foot for the thickness of the wall. Maybe on one for each side, but if it's not an exterior wall on this end, you don't need to add for that end. That's what this entire book goes into. All that fun stuff. What are you going to be tested on? Not so much all of that detail, but you will. There's what I'm looking for. Okay, there it is. You will need to know the thing about the stairs. You'll need to know that below grade needs to be specified, meaning anything that is underground. And in this area, we don't have basements like they know basements in the north. We have walkout basements here. And if we're looking at that cross section again, here's like the ground up at the front of the house. Here's the front of the house. Here's the front door. Here's the back of the house back here. And so the ground level is even right here, but then it kind of slopes down from front to back. And so inside, we've got a basement door that walks out into the backyard. So all of this space here is below grade. If you could drill a hole from inside the house to the outside and you're in any of this pink area, your drill bit is going to get dirty. It's going to get into the ground. Well, that amount of square footage under here, this lower basement level, cannot be given the same amount of financial value as this area. So this area up here is called above grade. And then by default, this is called below grade, below the grade of the earth, because the entire wall space all the way around is not above the dirt, and it's got to be given a lower value. An appraiser will not value a basement, as nice as it may be. Anybody been in a really nice basement space? It looks like if you closed your eyes and somebody guided you down there and you opened them, you'd look around and you'd think it is just as good as the main living area upstairs. Doesn't matter how nice it is, it will never get the same amount of value as this above grade space. So basements. Gotta differentiate. And sometimes it's a house that looks like it's a tri-level house. Maybe it looks like this. we go. Something like this one. So in this kind of house, you go in the front door, you walk probably about 10 feet forward and turn right, and you go down probably 5 or 8 stairs. And all of this downstairs is below grade, right? Even if only a little bit of it is below grade, as little as 10% can be below the grade, below the dirt line, and it would still have to be differentiated. You still cannot count it as heated living area. And along with the rest of it, you'd have to say this part is a level that is below grade. Okay, so stairs count for both levels unless it's an oversized opening. Slanted ceilings need to be measured just from the point at which you have 5 feet of headroom. That makes sense? Looking at faces. Let me know if I could need to explain it in a different way. And then heated living area needs to be reported separately. You got to report anything that's not heated living area differently. They give you some graphs, drawings to look at. As an example, I was kind of giving you some poor versions of it. Here's a one that has a carport off to the side, but the entire first level is these dimensions: 28 feet across, and then an inset of 3 feet, and then another 22 feet, 33 feet deep, 50 feet across back here, which should add up. 28 plus 22 should add up to 50. You can ignore the window holes. They're just kind of referencing them. They talk about the stairs here. They say include with the area from which they descend. Include the space under the stairs, regardless of the ceiling height under the stairs. And then they point out the ceiling heights. Again, it can have, as long as it has at least 7 feet of ceiling height, you can count it as heated living area. Then they've done their dimensions and shown their totals. They total them up. In post licensing, we go into an exercise of actually measuring a house by looking at the diagram like this. The main thing, here's an example of where the stairs descend and have like an opening bigger than what they need to go through, like an overlook of a 2-story foyer kind of thing. So you would take out that L shape from the lower level or from the upper level. Here's the 5-foot reference, a knee wall, they're calling it. At 5 feet, anywhere from 5 feet and less, you do not count. All right. So that is square footage. Another thing we're going to do on this listing appointment is to figure out what to ask. I call the listing price the wish price because that's kind of what they're hoping for. They're wishing for it. It may not be accurate. And you're going to talk to them about what you think it will probably sell for, but then you're going to go backwards from there and figure out, sorry, let me get that little square out, what you need to market it at. Because that pricing strategy can be really helpful. It can also kill your results. It can also be terrible. What if you do some research and determine that the price that it's probably going to sell for is, let's say, somewhere between $340 and $350? What would be a good list price that you might advise that seller to list it for? Yeah, if you do your research and you see that similar houses as this one have sold anywhere between $340,000 and $350,000, and you're about to list a house that's around that same size with the same type of amenities and kitchen upgrades, what would be your advice to ask for asking price, list price? Not you think it's going to sell for between 340 and 350. What should you put it on the market for? Or what are you going to give them advice to put it on the market for? Spoken like a man who lives in this market that we're in now. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's what a lot of agents do right now. But that's very market dependent. Good that you point that out, because it depends on the market. So you would need to not only do research on things that have sold, but let's also do research on what the current competition is, right? If you're finding that things that have sold recently are all selling above asking price, which is or has been most recently the case, then yeah, that's probably not a bad strategy. I like to tell sellers, look, we could go two different routes here. We could either put a good old-fashioned amount of wiggle room in the list price. Whatever we think it's going to sell for, we ask a little bit more and allow for some negotiating. But we could also, if you want to get it sold really soon and maybe encourage a competing offer situation, we could do what was that, Ben? Is that who said that? What you said, Ben, and ask for the lower amount to get those buyers excited about potentially missing out on an amazing opportunity. If you can get multiple buyers interested at the same time, the ending result you could end up selling, like you said, for more than if you would have put a cushion in it. So it all goes back to strategy. There's no right or wrong answer here. It depends on what their goals are. Do they want to sell fast? Well, competing offers are going to sell it pretty fast and for more money. So maybe we price it closer to what we think it's going to sell for, or maybe a little less, as long as we have confidence that the market is going to respond. Right now, in a holiday season, I may not try that strategy because there's a lot of people distracted by things. A lot of people right now are thinking, let's just wait till the new year. So you may not have as many competing offers that you might have been able to expect 6 to 9 months ago. You could certainly go the other route. Greg in the chat is saying, try to set a new comp, I assume what you mean by that is to put a big fat price on it. The problem with that is sometimes you can outprice yourself and end up scaring people away. And the longer you go without offers, and it's only been because it was too high of a price and they just thought to themselves, well, that's so overpriced that we don't want to even go there. We don't want to even, they're clearly not operating in reality. Therefore, I'm not even going to make them an offer because they probably wouldn't take it. If enough people do that over time and you sit there unsold because of you're just overpriced, there's a fine line between overpriced and priced just right. Then you might end up getting stale in the marketplace and end up having to sell it for less than you could have if you would have encouraged a multiple offer situation. It's all a big experiment, really. And different people have different strategies. But ultimately the decision needs to be made by that seller. Hey, here's what I think. Here's what our market looks like. Here's the chances of a multiple offer situation in light of the season we're in. And right now we have another component that we didn't have a year ago, higher interest rates. Right now there are few buyers in the market than there were a year ago because they don't like 7%. They liked 3% interest rate back then. Now it's 7%. Yeah, Nandana makes a good point. Could we add extra money for fences and upgrades? Yeah, we're going to get into that in chapter 17. We would certainly keep all of that in mind. Compared to other things that have sold, we're going to make adjustments upwards and downwards for how many more or fewer things that our listing has than those do. Yeah, good point. So, seller determines the listing price with your advice, with your guidance, in other words. How could listings end? Our best way, again, like everything else, is full performance. That means we get paid, but it could also expire. It could also be, hey, will you let me out of this listing agreement? Will your firm let me out? Maybe they will. Maybe they will only let them out with a penalty. But those are both ways. Breach by either party, bankruptcy of the seller. They declare bankruptcy. Well, now there's no listing agreement anymore, right? They're turning the house over. They're using that strategy to reset their financial lives. Property is destroyed. The listing is destroyed. And then if the seller dies, that listing dies too. If the listing agent dies, the firm still has the listing, right? And they would reassign it. With this disclosure, which if I haven't yet, I'll be sure to put in the Google Drive. It's a 4-page residential property owner and home and owners association disclosure. We as brokers cannot fill it in for them. We can't even touch it. We can't touch it with pen to paper. They have to fill in the blanks. And you might be able to see on the far right the 3 check boxes: yes, no, and no representation. Those are their choices. Yes, there's a problem. No, there's no problem. Or I'm not telling if there is or not. And we as brokers cannot fill it out for them, even though it's super small print and they might be blind. They would need to get someone else to fill it out for them if they can't do it, but it can't be you, the broker. We as brokers have a duty to discover and disclose material facts. We need to make sure that seller knows if they're going to check no representation, they better not tell you the thing that they're going to not represent about, because you have to tell it. And they could still check the box and not tell it themselves, but now you would have to. So they can choose not to disclose material facts by checking that. Yes, no, or no representation. That's what it looks like. We have to provide this RPODS disclosure to buyers before they make offers. So the best practice is to make it an attachment in the MLS so they have access to it. What if you just don't get around to doing that and they go ahead and make an offer before you've had a chance to put the disclosure in and give it to them? Well, they have a built-in 3-day right of rescission. In the RPODS, it says, if you get this after you've made an offer, the buyer has 3 days to back out if they want to, based on not having received it. Once they receive it, they have 3 days to back out and rescind their offer. Yeah, sure. So yeah, this disclosure, this RPODS thing, has some exemptions, and it is not required. You don't have to provide this disclosure if it's new construction, because there's nothing to say. It's going to be brand new. There's about 13 of them. You don't need to know them. Some other ones include a foreclosure. Foreclosure does not have to have this disclosure. And then also, my favorite term, what is it? It's something about the word exsanguination. Sanguine means blood. In other words, relatives. If you're selling to a relative, you don't have to provide the disclosure. It's something along those lines. But mainly the one we deal with the most is new construction does not require the disclosure, and foreclosures don't either. The RPODS is the 4-pager. The MOG is the mineral, oil, and gas rights disclosure. It's a single page, and that must also be given to the buyer. And then if it happens to be a house built before 78, you also have to give them the lead-based paint disclosure. That's the life of working with a seller. I see that message, Lilium, and I'll talk to you about that at a break. Now let's talk about working with buyers. We're on the buyer working with agents disclosure. Fourth option is this: unrepresented buyer. Is it going to be a buyer who doesn't have their own person? Then the agent who gave you this form can assist you in the purchase, but will not be representing you, does not have loyalty to you. You could be the only broker involved in the transaction. And if that buyer chooses not to have their own agent and you're not going to be a dual agent, then this would need to be checked, because what you have is an unrepresented buyer, and just need to make sure they know not to tell you anything, because you would have to tell the seller. So if the buyer does not want representation, need to use that box. Working as a sub-agent has a couple of possibilities. We'll get into that in a little bit. A non-exclusive written agency agreement means the buyer can work with other brokers. It could be an exclusive buyer agency agreement, or it could be a non-exclusive. I don't do non-exclusives. What I would do personally would be a limited written buyer agency agreement instead of an oral buyer agency agreement. But in this case, the buyer can work with other brokers, and the seller or the buyer only owes a commission if the broker is the procuring cause of sale, sort of like an open listing agreement. They can work with multiple brokers. We talked about oral buyer agency. The buyer owes nothing in return for the broker doing all of old car. All right, the broker has to provide everything, all 6 old car fiduciary duties. But it's an open relationship, right? And it's only good for how long? How long can you do this oral buyer agency thing? Is it an amount of time, or is it up to a certain activity? Oral buyer agency. No. You don't have to. There it is, Malik. In writing. You can be an oral buyer agent up to the point at which they want to make an offer. But once they make an offer, before they make the offer, you need to put your oral buyer agency agreement into writing. Got to be put into writing. And then if the buyer refuses to put it into writing, then the agent's role becomes sub-agent to seller. They're flipping over. They were acting for the buyer's best interest as an oral buyer agent. Now the buyer won't sign into a written one. But in order to make the offer, they have to do so. And if they just refuse and they still want you to make an offer for them, then your role flips over from buyer agent to sub-agent to seller. Do they really want you to do that? And in real life, it's probably not going to happen. But what would happen if this all went down? Worst case scenario, you would also have to get the seller's permission to flip back over to sub-agent to seller, for that matter, complicating things even worse. But oral buyer agency has to be put into writing at the time an offer is made. You could go for a long, long time and never have it in writing, as long as you're never making offers. It'd be a bad business decision, right? To be showing houses for a year without making any offers. You need to question maybe how serious that buyer is at some point. An exclusive buyer agency agreement must be in writing, at least by the time the offer is made. Buyer is working with just you, just one broker. It's a marriage. It's monogamy, right? Similar situation to the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. We compare this to the seller side. The listing agreement looks like this on the buyer side. If we are working or interacting with a seller and we're a buyer's agent, it might be that we're working with a for sale by owner, or it might be that we are a buyer agent making an offer on a limited service listing. In either case, we could be working directly with the seller. So we would contact them directly. We would do the disclosure of the working with agents, make sure they understand who you are representing and that they have someone else besides you, or maybe even just themselves representing. But be careful not to come across as if you're helping them as a dual agent, because that would be undisclosed dual agency, which is illegal. A lot of the agency agreement differences are paralleled in both the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement. On the buyer agency agreement, you can say, this is for properties in this neighborhood. I'm going to be a buyer agent for you if you buy in this part of town or in this neighborhood or this single property address. You can write in however much limitation you want, or they might want, in the buyer agency agreement. Maybe they want to use one buyer agent for South Charlotte and another one for Raleigh. And it would specifically say that on the first page. I'm going to use Jane as a buyer agent if I end up buying in Raleigh area. I'm going to use Norman if I end up buying in the Charlotte area. And then we have this guy. As a dual agent, we're an agent for both buyer and seller. We're a buyer agent and a listing agent. And we are limiting something. We're not able to provide one of the aspects of old car. What is that we cannot give in this dual agency situation? Obedience, loyalty, disclosure. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. So out of the 6 fiduciary duties, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable skill and care, as a dual agent, we can't give loyalty. We can't tell the seller the most the buyer might be willing to pay if we know that. We can't tell the buyer the least the seller might be willing to take. But besides that, we have to be honest and ethical and fair. We have to be a mediator. We cannot give either party an advantage over the other one. So in what that could translate to is you're talking to the buyer, putting the offer together, and they're saying, what should I offer? You've shown me 3 comparable sales that sold for $430 to $440. What does that mean for the house I want to buy? Should I offer them $430 or $440 or $450? I'm sorry, I can't give you that advice because I'm a dual agent in this situation. You can't give them the advice. And then if you make the offer because they told you, okay, then write it up for $330. Let's see what happens. Now you go over to the seller. You say, here's this offer I've written on behalf of the buyer. It's for $330. What do you want to do? The seller might say, well, what do you think I should do? You would say to them, I think that I'm a dual agent. Therefore, I can't give you advice on what to do. You just have to tell me how you want to respond, and I'll tell them what you said. You're kind of pointless. You can't give them advice because that would be a violation of loyalty. And the firm that you work for you need to see what the firm says. Are they going to let you be a dual agent? They might let you do dual agency, but not designated, or vice versa, or both. So the firm would have a written policy. Clients would have to give their informed consent that they're okay with dual agency, and you're limiting your services to both clients because of this. It's one firm, it's 2 clients. It could be one broker. It could be multiple brokers, by the way. True dual agency is not necessarily only one broker, but it's at least one broker. But what you're not able to provide is loyalty. Now, you've explained this situation to them, and they don't like it. And that buyer says, well, forget this. I'm out of here. I'm going to go find my own broker at a different firm, and I'll come back and make an offer on your listing. And you could say, wait a minute, I've got one more choice for you. It's this thing called designated dual agency. I can connect you with another broker in my firm. They can be just for you, all to your own very own real estate broker within my same firm. I'm going to still work for the seller. Look out for them of the house you want to make an offer on. You get your own broker within our firm, and we can treat it like it's 2 separate firms, because that person can keep all your secrets, including loyalty, and I can take care of the seller and keep their secrets. And at the time that someone is designated a designated broker, at the time that we have a person specified as a designated dual agent, they cannot know anything confidential about the other party. Maybe somehow they learn something confidential about them later, maybe because you're working with you're the designated buyer agent and your colleague in the same firm is the designated seller's agent, and he just can't keep his mouth shut. You talk to him on the phone about the offer that you're providing, you're bringing. You just wrote an offer and you're saying, here, I'm presenting my offer to you. I just emailed it. And he just says, oh, gosh, thank goodness. I'm so glad. They just keep nagging me. Gosh, I hope your offer is at least $430 when the price is like $450. Oh, I hope it's at least $430 because they told me that they would go down to that. And he just spewed all over told all of their business to you. It would be just as wrong for him to do that with another broker, another broker at another firm in what would be a co-brokerage situation as it is in this one, which is considered an in-house transaction with dual agency. So you could have designated dual agents. You could have multiple ones. Obviously, at the very least, there's going to be two, one for buyer, one for seller, but you could have like a team. The buyer could have two or three. Maybe it's a little team of buyer agents that they've hired and they have as a designated dual agent. So it's at the least two, one designated for the buyer and one for the seller. Which of the following pairs is not allowed in a designated dual agency transaction? And these little abbreviations mean provisional broker versus any broker in charge from any firm, or provisional broker up against their own broker in charge, or a provisional up against another provisional in the same firm, or a provisional broker against a non-provisional broker in the same firm. Or number 5, two non-provisional brokers against each other, one as a designated buyer, the other as a designated seller. Or a full broker up against their own broker in charge. Which of these is not allowed? Let's get an answer from everybody. Pretty obvious answer. Good job. The logic here is that provisional can certainly sell the house listed by a BIC as long as it's not their own BIC. And in fact, this number 1 isn't even dual agency at all because it would be a different BIC, right? If it's their own BIC, not allowed because that provisional needs to be able to confide in that broker in charge, but that broker in charge needs to be able to protect the confidence of their own client. And that is actually the priority. So it'll be impossible for them to do their job properly, to look out for both their provisional as well as their own client in a cross sale. All agency agreements must be in writing between the firm and the client. True or false? All agency agreements must be in writing. True or false? We could add a little silent parentheses there. All agency agreements must be in writing in order for you to have a closing and get paid. So in that sense, yes, true. They must all be in writing in order to even accomplish anything. Yes, there is such a thing as oral buyer agency, but that's only going to last you as long as it takes to get up to the point of making an offer. At that point, that oral buyer agency has to be converted to writing. So in that sense, all agency agreements must be in writing. Let's talk about commission splits. It's the fun math. So if we have $1 million sale price, I hope my numbers are right here. $1 million sale price, that's fun. The seller agrees to pay a total commission split of 6%. 6% of $1 million. Total commission being shared between the two firms is $60,000. And in this case, they have decided to give an equal split. The selling firm is the one representing the buyer. They're going to get half of that, and so is the listing firm. $30,000 each. So when the brokers go to the closing, the one for the buyer and the one for the seller, they both go to the closing. On closing day, the closing attorney eventually Not immediately, not as soon as all the papers are signed. It's going to take a couple more hours after that for them to verify and get final approvals of everything. But eventually, hopefully that day, they're going to get a check written to their firm for $30,000, which they will then take back to their office, turn in with all of their final paperwork. The office administrator will make sure all that paperwork is done properly, because nothing makes a real estate agent turn in their paperwork faster than the threat of not getting their money. And so you better believe the office administrator and the BIC uses that leverage all the time. Otherwise, they'd never get all the documents in, and they'd have a bunch of incomplete files, which would be a major problem if the commission came down and checked their files. So let's look on the far right. Selling firm is taking $30,000 back to the firm, giving that check over to the bookkeeper, office administrator, BIC, whoever. And so that selling broker has a commission split with their firm of 70%, meaning they make 70% of whatever they bring in. So the firm is going to take its 30% share of the $30,000, in this case $9,000, and they're going to write a check to the broker for $21,000, which is 70% of that chunk of commission. On the other side of town, the listing agent took their $30,000 check written to their firm back to their office, turned it in with all their paperwork. And for various reasons, it could be because they're new. Maybe they're a newer agent in the business. Maybe it's because they're on a team. For whatever reason, their split with their firm is a 50% split. So the check they're going to get from their firm is only for $15,000. So you've got two different brokers in the transaction, each earning a significantly different amount of money because it depends on their split with their firm, right? Maybe they became friends through the transaction. They're kind of friendly now, and they go out for drinks after the closing is all done, and they get to talking, and the listing broker finds out that the selling broker made $21,000 and he only made $15,000, and he says, gosh, what is your split with your firm? Oh, 70-30? Wow, mine's only 50-50. Maybe I should change firms, right? But that's how that could work. Here's how the math works. The commission in dollars equals the sale price times the commission rate. You probably could already do that in your head. Right over here, 6% of $1 million is $60,000. There it is. Sale price times commission rate gives the commission in dollars. That's how we can figure the total commission. And then the total commission in dollars times the commission split percentage, like when you take it back to the office, gives you your commission split in dollars. So when we're talking about total commissions, like going to the different firms, you're going to be seeing numbers like single digits, 6%, 5, 4, 3, 2. But then when we're talking about splits between you and your firm, you're going to see numbers in the double digits, like 50, 60, 70%, 80%. That might be a little helpful, sort of a check, a little mental check for you to think, keep it straight and think, wait, they said it's a selling broker with a 65% split with their firm, and it's a 5% total commission. Do you have enough information there to figure out how many dollars that selling broker's making? Yeah, as long as you have the sale price. They tell you the sale price, you calculate 5% of the sale price. You would also need to know, is that total 5% being split evenly between the two firms? And then the selling broker is getting 65% of their half, if that's what's happening. So, property sold for $500,000, and let's do this when we come back. Go ahead and take a break, and we'll do this one. I'll leave it up, but I'll see you in 10 if you want to mess with it.
Thanks, guys. You're the best. Literally.
Okay, come on back in together. Let me double check something here. Okay. If to access the forms I was mentioning earlier, you would go to Notion, scroll down till you get to the part about the Google Drive, click on that. It should take you to the folder. Like this, and then you click on sample forms, and then they all should show up, a whole bunch of them. So I hope that helps. All right, let's take a look at this problem we left you with. Property sold for $500,000, and the seller paid a 6% commission. It was split evenly between listing firm and selling firm. The listing firm split the commission half and half with the listing broker. The selling broker got 70% of the commission paid to the selling firm. So the question would then ask how much did one of those parties receive? If they ask for what the total commission was, then 6% of 500,000 is what we're looking for, right?
If you've been diagnosed with diabetes, it's time you become a Diaboss.
There we go. Total commission on the whole thing would be $30,000, 6% of 500,000. If it asked for how much did the listing broker or the listing firm receive, then what we're talking about is what their split was between each other. They actually got the same amount. You can see in that top box there on the right is the listing side. The selling side or the buyer's side of the transaction is below that. So on the listing side, both the firm and the broker had an even split. So they both walked away with $7,500. And then if it asked for what the selling broker's 70% split was, that's that lower box. That would be the total commission of $30,000. Half of that is 15, which the entire firm is getting, and then meaning the firm itself is getting, and then the split that broker has with their firm is 70-30. So the broker's portion of 15,000 is 70% of that, which is 10,500 in the lower right. If it asks how much did the selling firm receive, then it would be the other part, the 30% of the 15,000. Or in this case, $4,500. And then it talks about, if it said how much did the selling or listing firm get of the total, they split the total evenly because the problem said so. Listing firm split the commission 50-50 with the listing broker. But the tree kind of looks like this. Maybe you write it out this way graphically. That might be a helpful way to keep straight in your mind. That total commission is going to be probably a single digit number usually, right? 3%, 4, 5, 6%, 7, something like that. Now that we have then we get a total amount of commission in dollars, 7% of what? Of the sale price. Let's look at that here. $330,000 sale price, and it's a 7% commission. The total amount being paid out is $23,000. Gosh, I can't write threes today. $23,100. And let's say it's being split evenly between the listing firm and the selling firm. If it's being split evenly, divided by 2. Each of them are getting $11,550. So you're the listing broker. You're taking back from the closing to your office a check made out to your firm for $11,550. Same for the selling broker. Once it gets back to the office, then you're going to turn that in, and the firm's portion versus the broker's portion is going to depend on the split. So if the split on the listing side is like an 80-20, then we need to calculate 80% of the $11,500 in order to know what the listing broker ended up making, which would be $92.40. And the selling side, the buyer's representation side, the split between them and their firm is 60-40. Maybe the question says, what did the firm end up with? We need to determine 40% of the $11,550. In this case, 46.20. That help seeing it in a tree? Again, up here, this level is going to be single digit numbers probably. Down here, this level between firm and broker is going to be probably double digits. Be a little self-check to help you keep it straight. Now, another math problem, and this is a real world one. This is one that you need to know how to do. Things like excise tax and even property tax, you do need to know how to do those, but you only need to know how to do those so that you can check behind the paralegal to make sure they did it right. Because we're required to make sure the closing disclosure is correct, the calculations we're involved with. But this is one that you need to know how to do so that you can help determine what they need to sell the house for, or if it's even possible for them to sell the house for what they need to sell it, what they want to sell it for in order to do whatever it is they're doing next. So they frequently will ask this question: how much will I get when I sell my house? What will I walk away with after paying your fee? They always say it that way. Got to pay you. And then other things, what else does the seller have to pay? Things like excise tax, property tax proration, their portion of the property taxes. They got to pay up the HOA dues, whatever they owe there for those. Maybe some repairs, some other closing costs. The seller's portion of closing costs are fewer line items. One seller required expense that the seller has to pay for is something called deed preparation. That's really the bulk of their attorney costs, is to prepare the deed. And just for rule of thumb purposes, it's like about $400 or $500. What is deed preparation? It's like you're selling your car. You want to get the most money for your car, you're probably going to wash it, right? You're going to make it nice and pretty, squirt some Armor All on it. You never drove it looking that pretty. Now you're selling it. You make it look even better than it ever looked. You're preparing it for sale. Well, the deed prep is the same way. The attorney is preparing the deed for sale, putting it in the proper format so the seller can sign it over to the buyer. And so therefore the seller needs to pay for it. The seller paid to have their car washed. The seller needs to pay to have their deed prepared so they can convey it, transfer it to the buyer. That's how you can remember that deed prep is a seller expense. So after paying the deed preparation and some recording fees and their loan payoff and their commission to you, what will they walk away with? So therefore, what do they need to sell it for? Well, they might say, look, I want to buy a house. I want to sell this house and buy another one, buy another different one. So I'm going to need $90,000 in order to buy the next house to put as a down payment. What will I need to sell this house for in order to end up, after I pay you and everything else, I want $90,000 in my pocket. How much do I need to sell it for? Here's what that looks like. We're on a listing appointment. Don't let the sheer size of this paragraph scare you. It's just a few numbers here. It all breaks down pretty easy. On a listing appointment, the seller tells you that they're selling their house because they want to build a new one. They're going to need $190,000 from the sale of their house to put toward the new house. They have other expenses associated with selling this house. They're going to need to pay $3,500 towards some needed repairs. Maybe they figured out that they've got a water issue and they have to put in a French drain system, or maybe it's a mold problem. Whatever reason, they know they're going to have to spend $3,500 to get the house in sellable condition. So there's that. They also need to pay off their existing mortgage of $177,000. Their current home loan balance is $177,000. They can't sell their house without paying off that loan. And then they also have to pay about $2,300 for various assorted closing costs. All of these are numbers I pulled out of the air, made up completely. Depends on the situation, but this is what our situation here is in this problem. You are a really good broker, and they want to hire you to list their home for them. And you charge 7% commission because you're worth it, darn it, right? So they also have to pay that. From your research and knowledge of the market, ignore this next line. I was developing another concept. Just forget that one. Let's move on to the actual question. How much will they need to sell their house for in order to fulfill all their obligations, meaning pay all those numbers we just quoted? In order to pay all that stuff up above, including your 7% commission, and walk away with $190,000 in their pocket. What do they need to sell for in order to pull that off? So let's write down the numbers we know. They need to pay $3,500 for repairs. They have to pay $2,300 for closing costs. They have to pay $177,000 to pay off their current loan. And they want to end up with $190,000 left over to use in the next purchase. And they also have to pay your 7% commission amount. So step one, here, the problem here is you've got mostly things in dollar amounts, but then you have this one nagging thing that's in a percentage amount, which is your commission. So identify everything that is a dollar amount that they are obligated to pay. That's all this stuff. So the 35, the 23, the 177, and the 190 all added up is something they need to take care of within the price. When they sell the house, it needs to sell for enough for all of these pieces of money to be accounted for. And then the commission that you're charging is not in dollars. We don't know that yet. So we have to handle it in a different way. Step two, add all of this stuff up. All of these yellow numbers come up to $372,800. So if the house sold for $372,800, do we have enough money to handle everything they're obligated to pay? No, because you just spent all your time for nothing. There wasn't enough to pay you. So we need more than this. We need to get 7% brokerage commission added to this number, don't we? But it would not be correct to calculate 7% of this big number, because then you've cheated yourself. The 7% brokerage commission needs to be 7% of whatever it sells for. 7% of this 372.8 would be would be 7% of the net to them. So a classic mistake students make is to figure out 7% of 372.8 and add it on top. That's not what you do. You cost yourself probably thousands of dollars, at least a couple of $1,000s of commission. Your commission is based on the sale price, not this net price. Look at it this way. The sales price is everything you're getting for the house, like everything that's coming in. The total sale price is 100% of the money coming in for selling the house. Your portion of the sale price as the broker is 7% off the top. And then the seller's portion of the sale price is 93%. Right? So if you thought of it in terms of a split, like when you split your commission back with your firm, if you considered this to be a split between you and your seller, it would be a 93-7 split. 7% to you and your firm, right? And then 93% left over to the seller. Does that make sense? Their piece is 93, your piece is 7. What if you charged 6% commission instead of 7? What would be the seller's piece if you charged 6 instead of 7? Seller's piece would be 94, exactly. 100 total minus 6 is 94. Now, this is the part that the seller gets after paying you. And this is the part that is the 372.8. This is what we figured out they need to end up with. The seller ends up with 372.8. Once they get their 372.8 after paying you, they can pay all of these other things with it and end up with $190,000 in their pocket, right? So there's where we are so far. Here's how you do it. You add up all these dollar amounts, everything you can, except for your commission, and then you write it out, or you think of it like this. $372,800 is 93% of what sale price? And replace the is with a division symbol and the of with an equal sign. So if we plug in 372.8 divided by 93, that will show you what this thing needs to sell for in order for you to get paid and them to be able to pay all their other things and end up with the $190,000 in their pocket. So you divide it. You divide the net number by the seller's percentage portion. If you charged 5% commission, you would have divided this net number by 95% instead of 93%. You with me? So let's look at it in a calculation. We added up all these dollar amounts to 372.8. 372.8 is 93% of what? And so 372,800 divided by 93% sign, as we saw on the slide, is 400,000. Just so happened, I did not plan this number. 400,860 is what it would need to sell for to accomplish all of those objectives. Now we know what it needs to sell for to accomplish their goals. Now we as the broker look at the market analysis we've prepared and say, well, how likely is it to sell for 400,000? And maybe what we discover is that houses like this one are selling for between 410 and 420. Do we have good news for that seller? Yeah, they're going to be happy with us today because it should be pretty easy to end up selling it for this if everything else like this house sells for that. What if it's like 2008 though? In 2008, we figured out what they needed to sell for, and we then had to tell them, I'm sorry, houses like yours are going for between 380 and 390. Do you have 10 to 20,000, Mr. Seller, to bring to the closing with you to buy your way out of owning your house? That's not as fun of a conversation. Also important to know this before you're sitting in front of them, because one of their questions might be, well, gosh, if I can only get somewhere in there, but I need this, and you charge 7%, sure would help me accomplish my goals if we could get this 7% down a little bit. Would you come on down some? Now you need to make a business decision. How much is it worth to you to get this listing? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you're okay with 6% or 5% as well, as long as your BIC allows you, as long as your firm lets you negotiate down. So this is a very real world important thing to be able to calculate. It's just so you know, can they afford you to be involved in this transaction? Maybe you need to politely say, thanks, you know what, guys, I just can't help you. You can't afford me. You wouldn't say that probably, but you need to maybe try to sell it on your own if all of this is absolute. But here's another one. one of the numbers they wanted was they wanted to end up with 190,000. Why? Maybe they just wanted that because they pulled it from random air and they just kind of thought it would be nice. Well, here's where you say, okay, well, here's reality, guys. It's going to sell for 390. In order to end up with 190 to you, it would have had to sold for 401. So instead of 190, you'll probably get like 179. You'll end up with 179, about 180 or so if it sells where I think it's going to sell for and all of these other costs are fulfilled. You with me? Very real world application here. Here's another one. Homer wants to walk away from closing with $235,000 in his pocket. His mortgage balance is $190,000. His other expenses include he's got to pay off a home equity line of credit for $80,000. He's got some necessary repairs of $11,000. He's got attorney fees of $2,700, and the broker commission is 5% of the sale price. How much, different name. How much does he need to sell his property for in order to end up with $235,000 at closing? So it's kind of written out here. We just made a list of all the dollar figures. The $235,000 desired net that he wants to walk away with, the $190,000 to pay off his loan, the $80,000 to pay off the other smaller loan, the $11,000 toward repairs, and the $2,700 to the attorney. All those expenses come up to $518,700. Now we're just putting them into our little simple formula. First of all, what is the seller's split with the agent? What portion of the sale price will the seller get after giving the agent what they require? 5%. Well, 95, right? The seller's portion is 95 if the agent's portion is 5. So 518.7 divided by 95% gives us, and this was a total accident, $546,000 that it needs to sell for in order for the seller to be able to pay all this stuff and walk away with $235,000. Now, the answer choices has 546 in there, but one of the other answer choices, you better believe, is, let me think, what'd I do? Some very common mathematical errors was probably some of the other answer choices. So I would double check your math and thought process when you do a problem like this, because they will give you an answer that, like, maybe you left out the desired net. Let's see what would happen there. 190, I'm doing this on my calculator, plus 80, plus 11, plus 27. If we forgot to allow for their desired net of 235, that's 283,700 that they would need to get. They're not getting anything left. They just have got enough to pay off all the stuff. And if we divide that by their split with you, that would be 298,631, but that leaves out the 235 that they wanted to walk away with. They could give you that answer as an option of 298,631. And if you forgot to put the net in your calculations, then I didn't do that here, but that could be something that throws you off. So recap of the chapter. Listing agreement is not an offer to sell real estate. It's not like a guarantee. You're saying, I'll give it my best shot. It is an employment contract. It doesn't obligate the seller to sell either. That's another thing that some people are worried about. They say, well, I'm listing my house for $430,000. What if I get an offer for $430,000? Do I have to take it? No, they don't. If a seller gets their full price offer, do they have to take it? No, they will never be forced to sell. They could turn down every single offer, even if it's a bunch of over asking price offers, because it's more than just the price. It's the price and the terms and the time stuff. Oh, this one wants to close in a month. This one wants to close in a week. It's more than just price. Therefore, what I will say to calm down a seller that might be worried and really kind of hesitant about the process, they're worried about being homeless. They're worried about finding one to buy, getting theirs sold, but not having one to go to. And I'll say, well, look, guys, worst case scenario, we put yours on the market. We get like 45 offers and you don't have a place to go still. Maybe when we get the offers, we start real quick looking around and looking at a few things while we're thinking about the offers. And if you can't find something that you're really excited about, if there's just nothing, turn them all down. Don't accept any of them. I mean, it'll hurt my feelings a little because it would be a waste of time. Ultimately, if you don't find anything to buy and you don't want to sell, you don't have to sell. You can turn all those offers down. They don't have to accept any offer. Now, they do have to go through with a contract if it gets to under contract phase. Otherwise, they would have breached the contract. But until they've accepted a contract, they're in control. Okay. So the possible consequences of a seller not selling, I mean, if you produce a ready, willing, and able buyer making a full price offer, all cash, and the seller is just turning flaky on you, yeah, you could pursue them for your commission. But it might be that as long as the seller is not just taking advantage of you, it might be better for you to go along, work with them and say, oh, you chose not to sell. Okay, we've been on the market 3 months. I brought you 13 offers and you didn't want any of them because you changed your mind. You might make a business decision to stay their friend, stay friendly and say, yeah, okay, I'll talk to my BIC. We'll let you out of the listing agreement because you need to just regroup. I've done that before. And they ended up coming back to me a year later, buying a more expensive house. I was at a different firm that gave me a higher split. It actually worked even better for me. But first and foremost, I had no guarantee any of that would work. I let them out of it just on good faith that they would be loyal and that it wasn't right for them then. And they would appreciate that I put their needs first. And it worked out. It may not have, but in this case it did. That's 8, guys. That is unit 8. Let's cruise on over and into another big one for real life. Offers and acceptances of contracts. Basic contract law is chapter 9. Then chapter 10 we get into some more specifics, but let's check out number 9. Unit 9. Here we go. Our objectives here are to talk about what is a bilateral versus a unilateral contract, and we'll take a look at auction sales just kind of on the surface. We're only going to look at those in terms of what does it mean for an auction with reserve versus no reserve. And if anybody has spent any time on eBay, you know what all of that means anyway. It's same type of thing. Some level 2 application, there's the terminology. Some V words that I call them. Is it a valid contract? Is it a void contract? Or is it a voidable contract? And then addenda versus amendments. When do we use them? We're going to look at what essential elements of a contract are. We've seen that phrase before. We've learned what essential elements of a deed are. Now we're going to look at essential elements of a contract. And then this concept called reality of consent, which matters when you've got people in court suing each other over a contract. At what point was it a contract? And then the level 3 analysis is this concept of mutual assent, the thing that pretty much makes it go from offer to contract. So a contract at its basic level is a promise to either do something or to not do something between parties. Could be one buyer against one seller, or multiple buyers against one seller or multiple sellers, or vice versa. We've seen these words before. Express versus implied. And express is not only in writing. Testable, write that down. Express does not only mean it's in writing. Express means you expressed yourself. You intentionally stated what you want to accomplish. You didn't just make them guess. Sometimes in a relationship with someone special, we do a better job of, we think we implied what we wanted, but we didn't express what we wanted. We kind of wanted them to guess based on our actions instead of just coming out and saying, it makes me feel good, special, and loved when you say these things, do these things. Sort of like the love languages thing, right? Express versus implied. In a relationship, express probably works better than implied. It might be that you're with somebody who takes out the trash without being asked, and you're like, oh, he loves me because he took out the trash. Or maybe he thinks that he's showing you that he loves you by taking out the trash, but you're like, really? Is that the best you got? Could you maybe give me a card too? Let's have some express intent as in addition to implied. It's sort of like that, right? So express is either oral or written. Implied is just hoping they guess it right based on your actions. Other definitions here are unilateral and bilateral. In bilateral, both parties to the contract, for instance, owe some stuff. They both owe promises. They have promises they need to fulfill. The buyer's promise is, long as everything checks out, they're going to show up to closing with money and buy the property. Seller's promise is to not sell it to anybody else until this buyer does what they've said they're going to try to do and either buys it or doesn't. So bilateral applies to contracts. They are bilateral. And we learned already that agency agreements are also bilateral. You can't just fire the seller. The seller can't just fire your firm. You would have to let them out of the agreement if you wanted to. But you're not required to. A unilateral contract is where only one party's making a promise. You kind of have to sit back and wait and see if the other party is going to go through with it or not, because it's up to them. An example of a unilateral agreement would be an option to purchase. In an option to purchase, a potential buyer, is buying an amount of time during which they can make their decision to buy later. All they're saying now is, let me give you some money, Mr. Seller, and you're going to sit there and wait for me to make a decision. I'm buying, maybe it's a year. I'm buying a 1-year option, and I'm not promising to buy the house or property. I'm promising to make a decision whether I'm going to buy it within that year in exchange for giving you this $3,000 option fee. You get to keep the $3,000 whether I buy it or not. It's a unilateral agreement there because the seller can't do anything but sit there and wait for the buyer to decide if they actually want to buy it or not. Why might the buyer want to have an option to purchase? Maybe they're waiting to see if the zoning laws or the zoning is going to change for that property. Because if the zoning changes, it'll be worth more to this buyer. They're going to be able to put in that restaurant they want to put in. Right? A couple more terms. When you sign something, you have executed it. However, we've got to be a little more detailed here with these two words, executory versus executed. If you have a contract signed by both buyer and seller, but we haven't completely closed on it yet, it is not, in fact, an executed contract. It's only an executory contract because there's still a lot of things left to be done. You're not at closing yet. You might have like a month or even 2 months before closing, between contract and closing. When the buyer and seller sign off on the contract, on the offer, and it turns into a contract, now the inspections have to happen, the appraisal, the survey, all that fun stuff. During that under contract phase, what this thing is called is an executory contract. Now, when you're a brand new agent, you go into your firm, you're fresh out of school here, and you've learned these words. Don't go bragging. Don't go to the old school 20-year veteran agent and say, oh, you said you had an executed contract, but you haven't closed yet. So what you really have is an executory contract. You won't win any friends or influence people. Just know these two words for this class and then don't worry about them anymore. Executed means you're done. You got paid, it's closed. It's been recorded and closed, it's settled, it's finished. So we like that a lot. In what format is an express agreement made? Either one. Express could be oral, it could also be written. Here are the V words. When it comes to a contract, is it a valid contract, or is it void, or is it voidable? These words have to do with enforceability. What would Judge Judy say? If you had to take someone to court over this contract, do you have proof in writing that it even existed, or did you just shake on it? Oh, well, gentleman's agreement, two farmers sitting on the tailgate of a truck. I want to buy 10 of your acres. Okay, we don't need to do anything in writing. Let's just shake on it and we'll show up at closing in a month at our buddy's law office and then we'll have a deal done. We don't need to get fancy. But then maybe a week later, one of them decides not to sell it. The other one has nothing they can do about it. They try to take him to court and they appear before the judge. And the first thing the judge says is, let me see your contract that you're claiming they're backing out of. Oh, well, it was a handshake agreement. Okay, thanks for your time. Leave my courtroom. You're wasting my time. I have nothing to enforce this with. Enforceability, right? So the best one is valid. Valid contract satisfies all the legal requirements because it is enforceable. There are no problems with the actual paperwork, and there's no problems with the people involved. You must perform or there are consequences. Whatever is spelled out in the contract are your consequences for not performing. That's valid. With a valid contract, either side, either party, buyer or seller, could back out, but then the other party would be able to pursue them depending on what the contract says. It's enforceable on both of them. What if it's maybe not in writing at all? Then it lacks one or more of the essential elements. Therefore, it's not enforceable. So a good example of a void contract is a oral verbal contract. It doesn't mean void like the lottery ticket is void if you scratch off more than the allowable numbers that you're allowed to scratch, or however you do those things. It doesn't mean void like that. Think of void this way. If it's a void contract, there is a problem with the paperwork. If it's a voidable contract, there's a problem with the people involved. One means problem with the people. One means problem with the papers. So void means there's a problem with the papers, right? You can write that one down. Void also means that either of the two parties could neither of the parties can enforce against the other one. There's nothing in writing. It's void. Therefore, if they try to take you to court because you didn't do what they thought you should do, the judge is going to say, show it to me in writing. Oh, I can't. Then get out. That's void. Either party could back out and there's nothing the other one could do about it. In a void contract situation, either party could back out and there's nothing the other one could do. Void is different than voidable because voidable has to do with the people involved. The people involved in a contract need to be 18 sane and sober. 18 sane and sober. If they're not, they could still enter into a contract. However, it's going to be a voidable contract. When it's a voidable contract, that means one of the parties is either not 18 or older, or was intoxicated during the time the contract was signed, or is in some way mentally unable to handle their own affairs. So, voidable, problem with the people. Let's say that you have some property, maybe it's a house. Anybody heard of Mr. Beast? He's a YouTube guy, Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast is a genius. He's in eastern part of North Carolina. He's like 100 million subscribers on YouTube, which is insane. He brings in bazillions of dollars a month on ad revenue, but he also spends a lot of money on his videos, and he usually gives it all away. If he were 17 years old, YouTube millionaire, and he wanted to buy your property because it's 10 acres with a warehouse on it, because he does all these crazy stunts and stuff, and you're like any one of you here in the room today, all of you are either at least 18 years old or older, and you wanted to enter into a contract to sell to a 17-year-old YouTube millionaire, they are underage. Can they buy your property? Yes. But if they chose to not buy your property and change their mind, there's nothing you can do about it. They have the option to walk away, and there are no consequences because they're not 18 or older. If they had signed the contract while intoxicated, say they are 18, say they're 35 years old, but they signed the contract while intoxicated, that's another possibility where it's a voidable contract. They could say, look, I was drunk when I signed this. I don't want to do this anymore. And there's nothing you can do about it. That's what voidable is. One of the parties is either not 18, not sane, or not sober. Therefore, they can walk and there's no consequences to them. Void that we just looked at says either party could walk and there's no consequences available. Voidable means only one of the parties can walk away from the contract. Straight up breach it. It's not even a breach because it's a voidable contract. And there's nothing that you, the other party, could do about it because it's voidable. It looks like it's valid, but it can be rescinded by the other party. Did I hear a question in there? Sure. Oh, yeah. Sure. Yeah, that's a little different than the age one, isn't it? Because the age one is pretty easy to prove. Show me your ID or birth certificate. But the intoxicated one would require some sort of investigation, some sort of proof. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Yep, good point. The intoxicated one could apply and happen in real life this way. What if you go out and show property, you finally find that property they're excited about, and you say, okay, finally, it's dinner time. Let's go over to the restaurant, sit down, and I'll put the offer together while we order our food. And while you're putting the offer together, they're having a pitcher of beer. And by the time you're done, it's an hour or so later. You put it all together, they sign, you present the offer, it gets accepted that same night, they sign off, even more drunk. The next morning they wake up hungover and they change their mind. Now you have a problem because now you've got to tell that other side, oh gosh, oops, yeah, I was party to it, I saw it, they were indeed drunk, they want to back out. So yeah, there would have to be some sort of proving involved. You won't need to worry about that for the test. You just need to know 18, sane, and sober is required in order for it to be a valid contract. If they are not 18, not sane, or not sober, then what you have is not a valid but a avoidable contract. And all that really comes back to is one of the parties can choose to back out without any ramifications. The mentally ill one can be summed up with this example. I heard of this. I don't know the people, but I heard of this case. An older gentleman walked into a real estate firm, said all the right things, all the real estate words, said he wanted to buy something. An eager agent who was on call duty, meaning they were handling any walk-in traffic, they could get them as a lead because it was their turn. They put him in the car, showed him some houses. He found one he liked. He pulled out his checkbook. He wrote a check for earnest money. They made an offer. It got accepted. And that agent was happy because they thought they sold a house. Later in the week, not the older gentleman, but let's just say maybe 40-something-year-old adult woman came in, asked to speak to the agent, said, well, did you work with Mr. So-and-so? And the agent said, yeah, he's lovely. We're going to be talking this week to figure out the inspections, but I'm so glad to have sold him a house. Can't wait to see him in the house. And the lady says, well, I'm his grown daughter. I'm in charge of his affairs because he has dementia. He was a real estate broker for 30 years. Therefore, he knew all the words and lingo, and some people have better days than others. But ultimately, I saw that check go through the checking account, and I put it together and figured out what happened. She was missing for like 4 hours the other day, and apparently he tried to buy a house. Really happened, but it was voidable because he was not able to handle his own affairs. The mentally ill part. Good point. Wow. More than I can handle in this class. I don't think you're going to have to deal with that for the testable question, but in real life, it'd probably have to either be a medical reason that you could prove, maybe a diagnosis, an official medical diagnosis, or a legal decision. Like the courts have determined that this person is unable to handle their own affairs. So probably have to be backed up in either of those ways. If you could prove the anxiety medically, is that enough to be considered mentally unable? Good question. I'd love to know some case law about that. Yeah, I'm catching up in the chat there. Some good points mentioned there. Would they get their due diligence money back? Well, yeah, in avoidable situation, I think they might have a case for that. But usually it's really tough to get that due diligence money back. You won't be asked that question for this test. Okay, it all comes back to this, unenforceability. There's our buddy, Judge Judy. If you're in court, and you're trying to sue the other one or to back out of the contract, this is what she's going to want to see. Let me see the contract. So, a couple points here. Even if it's void or voidable, pay attention to this one. Even if it's this or this, can you still successfully close? Yes. You could still have a successful closing, even in a voidable or void contract. If both parties show up to the closing, everything's good, they still want to do it, they can sign and close on it. So an oral agreement, which would be a void contract situation, closing is still possible. You never had anything in writing until closing. You showed up, you gave them the money, they gave you the deed. You just bought a house and you didn't even, it just means that during the whole time while it was under contract, neither of you could have backed out without, either of you could have backed out and there's nothing the other one could have done about it. But you ended up in a successful transaction. But if it's not in writing, if it's an oral contract, then neither party has the enforceability. Neither one can sue the other for performance. And it's not enforceable between the parties. You okay there? Couple more words. Addenda are things that you use when it's an offer. Amendments are things you use to change the terms when it's already a contract. Offer versus contract. What's the difference? The offer is first. You make the offer. If they accept your offer and sign off on it and communicate that they signed, now that offer has become a contract. That's the difference. A contract is what you have when you're under contract. I know that was a genius statement. An offer is what you have up until the point at which the parties accept. So, addenda are ways that you add things onto your offer. The standard offer form, it's actually called an offer to purchase and contract because it serves as both of those things as needed. It starts its life being an offer. Then when everybody signs off and communicates, it's no longer an offer. Now it's a contract. When it's in the offer stage, it's only like 15 pages, our standard offer form. So it can't possibly have all the possibilities that everybody might need in a contract or in an offer. Therefore, you might need to add some other things, other documents to it to accomplish the buyer's goals. Then we'll talk about that when we come back. I'll see you in 10.
At Desert Body and Custom, we do it all. Body mods?
Check.
Custom paintwork.
No problem.
Suspension.
How low do you want to go?
As low as you want. Help out here! Get it up! Hold still! Nice work, Tim. Is your ride looking a little tired? Rims not shining like they used to? Paint seen better days? Well, we can help. Because at Desert Body and Custom, we can put the pride back in your ride. Make those wheels of yours the envy of the neighborhood. Why was he on fire? Don't walk away.
Yeah, baby. Who's your daddy?
welcome to our last 45 minutes. Let's talk about this addenda versus amendment thing. Here we are. So, addenda apply to what? If you want to adjust the offer you're making, add different terms to it, you're going to use an addenda, not an amendment. That's an easy one they're going to test you on. It's testable. Know which thing is for which stage we're in. Are we in the offer stage? And for instance, maybe the buyer wants to add an expiration date to their offer. Then it's going to be something called an additional provisions addendum. An addendum. We're adding the first three letters, add. Or maybe it's an FHA loan that they're trying to get. They're going to use an FHA VA addendum. We're going to look at those things individually in a little while, or next week, maybe tonight. So addenda are all about the offer you're making. It's how you add things to an offer. Well, now let's fast forward. We're under contract. We've made an offer. The seller accepted the offer. Everybody signed the papers and have communicated. Therefore, it is now under contract. Let's say the inspections start happening. We get a couple of inspections done. The inspector says that the property needs to have mold remediation. It needs a vapor barrier in the crawl space. The roof is leaking. We need to have the roof repaired. And the buyer asks the seller to fix all of those things. The document the buyer will use to ask for these things is called a due diligence amendment. An amendment, because we're changing things. The buyer went into this offer, into this contract, agreeing to pay a price based on the house being in a certain condition. But now the buyer has done inspections and found that it's not quite in the condition that the buyer wanted it to be in or expected it to be in. Therefore, now they're saying, you know what, if I'm going to move forward with this purchase, Mrs. Seller, you're going to need to fix some things. So in order to acknowledge that you're going to agree to fix some things, we need an amendment to make some changes. Now I'm going to buy it maybe for the same price I was originally planning to buy it for, but only if you fix the following things. And then the seller, she might say, well, okay, I'll fix these three things, but not the fourth one. Or I'll fix these two things, but then I'll just give you money instead of fixing the other thing. Or she might say, let's just lower the price. I don't want to deal with any repairs. Let me just take less for it. You pay me less and you don't ask me to fix anything. Any of those sorts of adjustments are going to be handled with paperwork called amendments. We're changing the contract because it is now a contract, no longer an offer. You with me? When they ask questions about amendments and addenda, you need to first ask yourself, are we dealing with a contract or are we dealing with an offer? At what stage is this situation, this transaction? Don't forget all three of these: void, voidable, unenforceable things. Any contract that is void or voidable or unenforceable could still successfully close if the parties chose not to back out. Doesn't matter that they're void, voidable, or unenforceable. The only time that matters is if somebody needs to take someone else to court over it. But if nobody's taking anybody to court to try to get out of it, it goes through and everybody's fine. You can still have a successful closing. Okay, here's a little weird nuance. What if I ask you this? Let me get off of this slide real quick. Somebody signs the contract and they have Alzheimer's because the doctor said so. What kind of contract is it that we just learned? Void, voidable, or valid? What is it? If they have Alzheimer's, medically diagnosed Alzheimer's. Voidable. Voidable. Problem with the people. He was either not sane, not sober, or not mentally able. In this case, not mentally able. Voidable. However, take it to another level. If the courts have made a decision, a judge in a courtroom has determined that this person is mentally incapable of handling their own affairs, now we're going to call this contract void. More than voidable. It's beyond voidable. It's now void. So if they ask you a test question and it says that someone was deemed by a court to be unable to mentally handle their own affairs, what kind of contract do they have? The answer is a void contract because the court was involved. The court determined they were unable. Short of the court determining it, it's what you said. It's voidable as we learned originally. But that little nuance is important. If they are legally declared unable to handle their own affairs, void, not voidable. Got it? So, what are these essential elements of a contract? Here they are. In order for it to be considered a contract, the essential elements include mutual assent. This idea of offer as well as acceptance. I've made an offer and you've accepted it. If I make an offer and you never accept it, that's not the provision. Therefore, it can't be it's not a contract because it doesn't have that essential element of acceptance in addition to the offer. Another essential element is something of value, also known as consideration. Does this contract include consideration in exchange for the real estate? It has to, in order for it to be a contract. That's an essential element, is something of value. Probably money, right? Probably some sort of check, money. Maybe a combination of down payment and loan amount. Money from a lender that now that buyer has to repay over time, but the seller gets all of the money at closing. And then competent parties. We learned about that just now. Competent parties are an essential element to a contract. At least 18, sane and sober. And then the contract is for a lawful objective. You're going to do something lawful with it. If you try to go into the courtroom and complain to Judge Judy that you're buying a meth house in the middle of the marijuana field and that person is not honoring his end of the contract, she's going to, number one, excuse you from the courtroom and backing you up. It's unenforceable. And number two, probably have you visit those nice men in the uniform on your way out. Lawful objective, competent parties, consideration, and mutual assent are required, are essential elements to the contract. Let's look at a couple things there. This mutual assent thing, one party is making some offers, or is making an offer with including some terms, a price and terms. They're saying, I'll give you $358,000, and I want to close in 30 days, and I want you to leave the refrigerator, washer, and dryer, and okay, I'll let you take that ugly dining room chandelier that you want to take with you, even though it's a fixture. Write it all up. That party has made an offer with price and terms. They send it to the other side. Whether it's the buyer making the offer directly to the seller, because remember, we're in Chapter 9 now. All we're talking about is basic contract law. We'll get more into the nuance of interacting with brokers later, but it's the same essential stuff with this contract law. It starts here. A buyer can buy from a seller without an agent. The contract provisions are still the same. So it's an offer from a buyer to a seller, whether they have an agent or not. And then it's an acceptance by that person that the offer was made to. It requires both. Mutual assent is both of these things in tandem. Both parties agree to the terms. There's what's called a meeting of the minds. All of this stuff matters when you go to court over it. If somebody says, no, we never had a contract, I don't want to have to go through with this thing because I don't think we ever actually had offer and acceptance. We didn't have mutual assent. We didn't have this essential element of a contract called mutual assent because I never accepted it. They made the offer, but yes, you did. You said you were taking it verbally. And then okay, whatever from there. Point is, offer and acceptance, a meeting of the minds. The judge is looking for, was there a meeting of the minds? So, who's making that offer? Who makes offers? Tell me, who's making an offer? Somebody's offering to buy someone else's property is usually the case. We usually think of a buyer as being the one making the offer. Remember those O-R-E-E words, offeror, offeree in this case. The offeror is the one making the offer. And normally it's going to start with that person being the buyer. But it could be the seller who makes an offer. When it's a counteroffer, for instance, the buyer has made an offer to the seller, and the seller has said, no, I don't like what you offered me, but, if you could come up a little bit on the price, then I would accept it. So you offered $350, I'll take $360. What has just happened? The seller has rejected $350. So that first offer is off the table. It is dead, killed it, rejected it. The seller made a counteroffer of $360. And by doing that, the $350 is as if it no longer exists. It's like it never existed. A counteroffer is a rejection of the original offer. You can never go back to it unless the first offering party allows you to. So if a buyer makes an offer and the seller says, no, not $350, but I will take $360, and then the buyer says, $360, that seems like a lot. You know what? No, I'm just not interested. There's a lot more for me to pick from. I'm just going to walk. If the seller then said, okay, wait a minute. Okay, I'll do $350. I'm signing the papers because I have them in front of me with $350 written on there from your original offer. I'm signing them. So boom, you're locked in. You can't go away. Is that true? No. Right? The buyer made an offer in writing for $350,000, sent it to the seller. The seller has it in their hand and they say, no, I want $360. They call the buyer. They say, nope, $350 is not good enough, off the table. I will counter with $360. The buyer says, I'm done. I'm not interested in $360. I'm walking away. If that seller tried to take that paper they have in their hand that says $350 and say, okay, well, then I'll take your $350. I signed it. I dated it. You can't leave. We are now under contract. That is not true because the seller killed the $350 offer, even though it's in writing in their hand. Therefore, what am I getting around to? It's more than offer and acceptance. It's also communication of the acceptance. What does it take for a property to go under contract? Not just the offer and acceptance, but also communicating to the other side that you accepted it. The communication is the key. The seller, in this case, already communicated to the buyer that they were countering with a higher price, which nullified the original $350. They countered with $360, and that killed the $350. It's no longer to be revived unless the buyer resubmits it. But the seller can't lock them in just by signing the paper. And if a burglar broke into the seller's house and saw this contract on the desk and saw that, oh, I see a $350 price, I see a buyer's signature, and I see a seller's signature, and everything's dated. While they're stealing their Rolex watches and stuff, they're just assuming, oh, looks like they sold their house. Well, good for them. What that burglar doesn't know is the communication didn't happen. Either the counter happened verbally and therefore it killed the first $350 offer. Even though the seller signed off on it, the seller made that $360 counter and that killed the $350 offer, right? We're going to get into that a lot. So a counteroffer is when An offeree changes any terms of an offer or. What if buyer makes an offer? Let me do it this way. So we have buyer side and seller side. And we have the fence. I call it the fence. The fence down between the buyer and the seller. It's like a tennis match or a volleyball match. Buyer makes an offer. They send it over to the seller. And that offer is for $350. Seller says, nope, not interested. I want $360. And they send that back over to the buyer. The buyer says, nope, I'm not interested. I'm out of here. That's where we are so far. In this case, the buyer in the beginning was the offeror for $350. They made an offer for $350. Then when the seller countered, the seller was an offeror for $360, meaning the buyer was the offeree. But that didn't work because the buyer said no. What if the buyer said yes? Seller counters with $360. We have a deal. Buyer signs it. We have a little contract here with $360 on it. Got buyer's signature and seller's signature. Are we under contract? You don't have enough information. Unless that buyer has told the seller that they signed it or sent it back over in some way communicating to the seller that they accepted, then you don't have a deal. It's not a contract. Communication. That's important. Now let's get brokers into the mix. You have a buyer working with a buyer's agent. And you have a seller working with a listing agent. Buyer agent prepares an offer for $350. They send it over to the listing agent because the agents talk to each other. The listing agent forwards it up by email to the seller. The seller says, let me take a look. Let me think it over and sleep on it. And the next morning, the seller says to their listing agent, okay, $350 is good. I signed the offer paperwork. I don't need to make any changes to the price or the terms. I'm happy with the $350. It's signed. It's not in the listing agent's possession yet, but the seller has this thing signed by buyer because it was their offer, and the seller signed off and dated for $350. Seller tells the listing agent that they accepted. Do we have a contract? There was communication, but the communication was all on this side of the field. In order for us to have a contract, that communication needs to hop the fence, get swatted back across the fence. So until that happens, we do not have a contract. Yes, a burglar could break in. They could see a piece of paper for $350 signed by both buyer and seller and dated, and they would make an assumption that it was a contract. But the truth is, they don't know. It never got communicated. It got communicated from the seller to the listing agent, but that's not good enough because that's basically like the same person because the listing agent is representing the seller. It's only until the listing agent tells the buyer agent that we have a deal, even if that contract in like the actual paper that's signed, whether it's an email or physical piece of paper, it has not been sent over yet. That doesn't even matter. What matters is that the seller told the listing agent they signed it, and the listing agent told the buyer agent that it was accepted and signed. I'll follow up later with the actual paperwork. The communication locks it down. Now we're under contract. Now, sure, if you don't actually follow up with the paperwork, that's going to turn into a problem. But point is, it's offer, acceptance, and communication. That's huge. That's what people get wrong. So they're going to draw out a paragraph scenario for you, just like I did. Buyer makes offer to seller, seller rejects it, buyer makes a different offer, whatever. At what point in the back and forth did this go under contract? You're looking for the point at which it was communicated across the fence. Either the counter offer communicated over here or the initial offer being accepted and communicated, or a counter back and forth. At what point was something agreed upon and also communicated across the fence? It gets even more detailed when you have a situation where it's not a buyer's agent. Maybe that buyer refuses to sign the buyer agency agreement. What happens? Who is this agent? Who is the selling agent? What is their role if the buyer refuses to sign the buyer agency agreement? This whole time they've been acting as an oral buyer agent. Now they're making an offer and the buyer won't sign buyer agency. What is the role of that agent at this point? You got it. Sub-agent to seller. Okay, fine. They are getting, let's just say they're even getting paid. It doesn't say zero on the MLS sheet. They're getting paid. Maybe they're getting paid less, but they're still getting paid. They make the offer. The seller tells the listing agent, yeah, okay, I'll take it. They communicate back over to the sub-agent. From listing agent to sub-agent, they say, yep, he signed it. He accepted it. We have a deal. But what you don't know is that the buyer told their agent here, they said, look, I'm going to sign this offer, but then I'm going to go on a hunting trip up in the mountains and there's no cell reception and I'm leaving right now. So I won't be back in cell coverage until Monday. Saturday, Sunday, I'll be out of pocket. So when I come back, hopefully they've accepted it and I'll be under contract. Well, it's Saturday night when the seller accepts the offer, tells the listing agent tells the sub-agent. It's Saturday night. Sub-agent tries to call the buyer just in case, but can't reach them. We do not have a contract. Because if the person, the selling agent helping the buyer is not a buyer's agent, then telling them is not good enough. Telling a sub-agent for the buyer is not enough communication. It's not going to become an actual under contract until that sub-agent can communicate with the buyer and tell them that it has been accepted. So the seller accepts, they tell the sub-agent says, it's Saturday night, I won't be able to tell my buyer this good news until Monday. So we don't have a contract. Can the seller keep showing their house to more buyers? You bet. Seller can keep showing. And the problem is going to be on this side. The buyer almost got the house purchased, but between Saturday night and Monday morning, when this person came back in cell coverage and could actually get the news, they had 14 more offers. And the seller took one of them. Does this buyer have anything that they can do? As long as that seller says, you know what? I back out of that acceptance because I took a better offer that just came in. Until that buyer gets the news, the seller can still back out of their counter. And there's nothing the buyer can do about it. Email is certainly sufficient. However, in this scenario, we're just going to say that there's no communication at all available between the sub-agent and the buyer. But yeah, news, this communication that's a good point. It can be phone, it can be email, it could be text, fax, whatever that is. So yeah, that is possible and allowable for communication. You could do an entire transaction without killing a single tree. You don't have to have any paper. It could all be electronic, by the way. So that's the magic of these couple of chapters, is knowing when the offer goes through and at what point did it become a contract. An easy weak point in this topic on the test is to not keep track of whether the thing they're talking about in the test question is an offer or a contract, and answering it as if it were a contract when it's only an offer, or vice versa. So step one, when you get to these kinds of questions in the test, pause, clear your head, find the word offer or contract so you know which way to answer the question, because they're two different types of documents, two different phases, hugely different situations. Okay. So, by the way, yes, a buyer's probably going to be the one that makes the offer first, but maybe not. What if a buyer has looked at the same house like 5 times and they just can't make a decision? And the seller says, gosh, this same person has looked at our house 5 times. Why aren't they making an offer? And you, their listing agent, say, well, why don't you make them an offer? It's possible. It's okay for that seller to make an offer to the buyer. Maybe the buyer doesn't make an offer because they think the house is overpriced and they don't want to either insult the seller or even they just don't want to haggle. A lot of people don't want to negotiate. They just want to buy stuff like CarMax and say, tell me the price and I'll either pay it or I won't. I don't want to go back and forth. You hear that a lot. I just don't want to go back and forth. Okay. So maybe that's why the buyer never made an offer. They're waiting to see if the seller comes down. Maybe the seller gets be in a hurry. The transfer needs to happen sooner, the job transfer. So the seller says, okay, now I'm kind of eager. Between you and me, Mr. Listing Agent, I really want to make this happen. We've got a buyer that's looked at it 5 times. Okay, I've been asking $375. Let's make an offer to that buyer of $360. See if we can get some things moving. And that's allowable. In that case, the seller is the offeror. The seller is the offeror. And if the buyer rejects that, says, no, not 360, but 355, the buyer has become the offeror. They counteroffered, right? Any offers, whether counteroffer or original offer, can be withdrawn up until the other party accepts, right? So if you get real excited about a property and you make an offer on it, in this kind of market, buyers want to keep looking while they're waiting to hear an answer back on that first offer. Maybe there was a close second choice house and they say, well, let's put in an offer on this one, but because I've lost 5 in a row, let me keep looking. I don't want to sit around waiting in case they make me wait 3 days. Let me go ahead and see if there's something else out there. I saw 3 or 4 more we kind of liked. So you meet them at some more houses, you show them, and the third one, they love it more than that original one that they made an offer that's still out there. So they have an offer out there waiting to be responded to. In the meantime, you've shown them another house and they love it and they want to go after that one. What is your next step as a broker at this point? Communicate to that original first offer a listing agent, look, this is done. This is off the table. We no longer have this offer in play. If your seller was thinking about taking it, it's too late. It's off the table. We found another one they like better. You better do that first. If you don't, if you forget or let that just kind of be percolating and staying in place and you make an offer on this other one, what are you putting your buyer at risk of? Got one offer that you've made. You're waiting to hear back. In the meantime, you've shown them more houses and they like another one and they make an offer on another one. They now have 2 offers out there on 2 different houses. What could possibly happen to that buyer? Do they have to buy 2 houses? Maybe. What if both those sellers accept? You're all like, what's the catch? I know you're going to give it a catch. No, they would not have to buy 2 houses. They would be at risk of losing due diligence money because they had to make an offer with probably due diligence money on the first one. And then on that second one, they made an offer and put due diligence money along with that offer. So if both of those sellers accepted, the buyer can only buy one of the 2, but they could still be obligated to provide the due diligence money to the other one they didn't end up taking. So that's all that's at risk. So it depends on how much that due diligence money is. So if the test question is, can a buyer make offers on more than one house? The answer is yes. Could they make offers on more than one house and end up having to buy more than one house? The answer is no. What is their risk? The due diligence money, losing it. So if they're like coming in from California and they just can't make offers in person, they're relying on you to go look at it and show them maybe pictures, and they can't narrow it down past like 3 houses, could they make offers on all 3? Yes. As long as they are willing to lose due diligence money on 2 of them. And then on the 3rd one, they wouldn't be losing the due diligence. They're going to buy that one, so they're going to get the credit for it back at closing, right? With me? That's the ultimate risk, because the buyer doesn't have to buy it. They can back out for any reason or no reason, is what we're going to see in Chapter 10. It's the way the system works here in North Carolina. The buyer can back out within the due diligence period. They can back out and get the earnest money back. They can even back out after the due diligence period. It's just that if that happens, they're not getting the earnest money back. They will have lost both due diligence money and earnest money. But the whole way, all the way up to closing, they can back out. The question is, how much money are they having to walk away from? So a counteroffer, first, another testable thing here. Counteroffer is what? It's a rejection and a counter proposal, a creation of a new offer. Can't go back to it unless the original offeror allows you to. And then communication to a buyer agent or a listing agent is the same as communicating to their principal. But communicating to a sub-agent to seller who is helping a buyer is not good enough. It would need to be communicated from them to the buyer, and then that communication component has been fulfilled. How does an offer get terminated? By being revoked or withdrawn before acceptance by the other party. How is a contract terminated? Ooh, that's different. That could be multiple ways. It could be not the death of the seller, because the contract is still potentially in place even if the seller dies, because the estate has to honor it. So it's up to the buyer what they want to do. Do they want to walk away because the seller died, or they want to go through with it? It's their choice. But an offer is different. If the seller dies and there's an offer on the table, the offer dies, because it's just an offer. It's not a contract. But it can die at any time if you kill it by revoking it, by backing out, withdrawing from it before that acceptance happens. What else do you need? Offer and acceptance, and also this consideration, which is anything of value. Could be my favorite consideration. I've never experienced it, but I think it would be great. Or fainting goats. How about a herd of fainting goats? Anybody seen fainting goats? You scare them with a loud noise and they just stiffen up and fall over. They wake back up. It's okay. Something of value. Money, probably. Now, when you make an offer, here's what's involved. The offer to purchase, documentation, maybe some addenda. Addenda is plural for addendum, so you don't say addendums with an S, you say addenda. So the offer, the other paperwork, because you're going to add some more terms to the offer, and some money. Due diligence money. Properly, it's called a due diligence fee. A fee is something that's non-refundable, like a pet fee when you rent. You're not getting that back. That's for the privilege of having a pet. Due diligence fee, non-refundable. Due diligence fees have become monsters in the last few years. They used to be a nice, polite little $500, maybe $1,000, maybe a couple thousand. They've become tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000. It's non-refundable. Even if the seller won't fix the roof that's leaking, buyer finds out the roof leaks because of an inspection. The seller says, I'm not fixing it. Buyer says, I'm walking away because you won't fix the roof. That's too much, too expensive. What the buyer's walking away from is that due diligence money. They don't get that. It's non-refundable. Another way that a transaction could die is if the property doesn't appraise. So let's say that the contract price is for $300,000. The appraisal is done and it appraises for $275,000. Well, the buyer's lender is only going to loan money based on $275,000. They're not loaning money. They're not giving a 90% loan to value on $300,000 if the appraisal doesn't come in at $300,000. So we have a $25,000 gap here. What are the options of how to move forward? If it only appraises for $275,000, but the agreed upon price was $300,000, well, the seller could choose to come on down to that appraised value of $275,000 if they're willing, or the buyer could borrow from grandma, dig up the jar with money in it in the backyard, sell some stuff, come up with the additional $25,000 to put as a down payment. They're still borrowing $275,000, but they're giving the seller an additional $25,000 for their down payment to make up that gap, or some combination of the two. Maybe the seller agrees to come down to $380,000 and the buyer comes on up and adds $5,000 to their down payment. They still are borrowing on the $275,000. That's how we handled the appraisal. But what if we can't work any of that out? The buyer won't add to their down payment. Maybe they can't afford it. The seller says, are you crazy? This is a seller's market. There's no way I'm coming down. I'll just let you walk away and I'll find a buyer that can afford my property, and I'll risk that their next appraisal is going to come in higher. You can be excused. It doesn't appraise for what I want, therefore go away. And if this transaction falls through because the property didn't appraise, buyer still loses the due diligence money. That's how delicate this due diligence money is. Non-refundable, even because of appraisal not coming in or inspections. They're walking away from it. What else is that buyer having to do when they make an offer? Write another check. In addition to due diligence money, they're going to write a check for earnest money. Earnest money has been around a long time, longer than due diligence money in this market. We've had earnest money since I've been in the business and beyond. It's a promise. It's sort of a gesture of good faith. It's saying, look, this is still my money, seller. I'm not giving it to you yet. I'm setting it aside out of my own reach. I'm going to let somebody else hold it, either a broker firm or the attorney. So it's good faith money. You might also see it called that. It's showing how serious you are. It's for the buyer to illustrate by setting aside their own money that they're a serious buyer. Earnest money is made out payable to whoever is going to hold it in the trust account. It's payable to that trust account, whether it's a real estate firm or an attorney. Due diligence money is payable to the seller directly. It's given once the property becomes under contract. We don't give the due diligence money when the offer is made, because the seller, if it's got their name on it, payable to the seller, they could go ahead and cash it. And that's not what we want. We're only going to let them cash the due diligence money if this turns into an actual contract. The due diligence money gets written to seller. Earnest money gets written to whoever's holding the trust money. Now, this offer gets accepted. It becomes a contract. We fast forward to closing day. The buyer brings consideration, right? They're providing consideration, something of value. What is consideration? Consideration is a combination of the loan that they're borrowing, the money they're getting from the lender. They're going to give that to the seller, and they're also going to give them the down payment that they're throwing in. What is not consideration? Due diligence and earnest money are not called consideration. The consideration is what you're bringing at closing in the form of the check from the lender that you're borrowing and the down payment money that you're putting down. So, all that said, earnest money deposit is not required. You don't even have to provide it. If you can find a seller willing to accept your offer without you putting in earnest money, congratulations. You still can get the house. You can still buy the house. So earnest money is not required. It's not consideration. It is an expression of good faith. I'm a serious buyer. So serious, I'm willing to set aside thousands of dollars of my own money out of my own reach for the duration of this contract, under contract period. And then at closing, the earnest money is going to be credited to the buyer's side, right? It's that much less the buyer needs to bring with them to the closing. By the way, earnest money is not required for a transaction. Neither is due diligence money, officially, legally. Now, good luck. You're probably not going to find a seller who's going to agree to you not giving them due diligence money or putting up earnest money, but officially, legally, sorry, those things are not required. All right, we're right in the thick of it. We're going to get on into the rest of this next week, as well as chapter 10. Once we get into, 9, 10, and then it's, what's next? 19, yep, 14 and 15 is the loan stuff, finance stuff. That's another one, big pair of chapters. I think once we finish finance, I'll probably let you go ahead and take the midterm. You'll know enough content to be able to take the midterm exam at that point. So another week or two, we'll do the midterm. Put your name in the chat for me. If you have questions, let me know. And I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend.